Hey, lovely listeners, and welcome back to Crime Analyst and the Intelligence Cell. And today I'm joined by a very special returning guest. Please introduce yourself, Dr. Z.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jamie Zuckerman. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist outside of Philadelphia, and I specialize in working with people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, coercive control in their relationships, and helping them navigate that process and successfully exit the relationships.
Yes, and I'm really pleased to have you back, and I really appreciate you saying successfully leaving relationships, because we know that when there's coercive control and when there's an abuser, that's one of the most dangerous times. 76% of murders of women happen at the point of trying to leave a coercive controller. And that finality, that separation, a lot of people miss. And you and I both share that we want to equip people to understand that leaving is a process. It takes time. It's not just do it immediately because of the risk. And the case we're going to talk about today is the case of Ellen Greenberg, which is one that's back in the news headlines 14 years later. For those who don't know the case, before I ask Dr. Z to weigh in, this is a case that I've been posting about because when you see the injuries of 27-year-old Ellen, it's very hard just to see a visual and believe from the visual of many knife wounds to her head, to the back of her neck and the back of her head. It's very hard when you see that visual to think that this could ever be a suicide, but that's what happened. The case in terms of when it happened was back in January 26, 2011. And Ellen was 27 years old. She was working as an elementary school teacher at a local academy in Philadelphia. And I don't know if you even recall the day, but when you go back and you look at the weather reports, Jamie, it was a very snowy day. You were having blizzards and snowstorms. So actually Ellen had come back from school early. The class had been dismissed. And so she was at home, unusually so. And what then transpires is the Philadelphia PD get a 911 call at 6:34 p.m. on that day, stating that he had found his fiancé dead, or didn't say dead, but had found her. And it's a 4-minute call, which is very interesting in and of itself. And I've taken the call apart. But what he doesn't really convey is what he needs, whether she's still alive or not. And the call handler, that to me jumped out straight away, because any 911 call, you're calling for purpose, you're calling for urgency, you're calling for help. And that wasn't present. And in fact, the dispatcher had to really tease out of him what sort of state Ellen was in. So the 911 call really was the first point of entry for first responders attending the address. And that call came in at 6:33 p.m. And originally in that 911 call, Sam Goldberg was the fiancé, and he believed that Ellen had killed herself and that she had fallen on a knife. And at first he wasn't sure, but I will go through the call specifically. But he did say that he wasn't sure, first of all, and then he talks in absolutes. But why I bring that up is because first responders attend and they treat it as a suicide. And then the autopsy occurs. It's a Dr. Marlon Brandon. Is the medical examiner. Dr. Marlon Osborne is the medical examiner, and he undertakes the autopsy, and he determines that the manner of death was homicide. And then some very bizarre things happen, because in April of 2011, Dr. Osborne attends a secret meeting. I say secret because no one knows what really transpired at the meeting between the PD, Dr. Marlon Osborne. I think Dr. Marlon Osborne's boss was there. But after that meeting, it was agreed that he would change the death certificate to suicide. And this really is very confounding to me, this timeline and the crime scene. But before we get into that, I would really appreciate you just outlining your local knowledge, Dr. Z, of being in Philadelphia at the time in the case, which I know that lots of people were talking about it. But what's interesting, there hasn't really been that much national media attention, which is very curious to me as well.
Yeah. So I did not know Ellen personally, but we had several friends in common. So this hit very close to home. In where I lived, we were around the same age. Again, like I said, friends in common. And I can tell you that I have heard nothing but lovely things about her, that she was a very sweet person, very kind, very warm, had a ton of friends, was very close with her family. And that was pretty consistent across the board. So, that was, it was very heartbreaking. It really, being that she was young, she was engaged, she had her whole life ahead of her. She was a school teacher, she lived in Philadelphia. It was just, again, like I said, it was a lot. It was a lot. It weighed on a lot of people, even those that didn't know her.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss and for her family and friends' loss, because when something horrific like this happens, it's like a ripple on the pond. And when you've got friends in common as well, it's really, really difficult to
Hmm.
process A, losing Ellen in this way, but second to that, all the strange goings on thereafter. And I do just want to shout out her mother and father, Josh and Sandy, who not only lost their daughter in very brutal circumstances, but also have been fighting relentlessly for justice for Ellen ever since. And I really also like the way that you described her character, because that's something consistently that I've heard from people too, from a
Yeah.
distance, that, she was somebody who was very enthusiastic about life. She had lots
Mhm.
of friends. She was a very happy child, her mum and dad said. She was a leader, not a follower. She had a great circle of girlfriends. She was a girly girl, but also got on well with men as well. And she was a high achiever, a hard worker, very athletic. And I get the sense that whatever she turned her hand to, she would be successful at. She was
Mhm.
a strong personality. She also had two masters. She was very well educated. And so when we hear about her character and who she was, it looked like she had everything going for her. She had
Yeah.
been in a relationship with Sam Goldberg for 3 years. They had become engaged. There's a picture of her showing her ring off. And for all intents purposes, it looked like her life was going in the direction that she wanted it to go in. But as usual, when you scratch the surface and you ask the right questions and you look behind the scenes, that's not really what was going on. And she was
Correct.
actually seeing a psychiatrist, wasn't she? She was
Hmm.
getting help because her father,
Hmm.
she'd spoken to her father and her mother about things not going quite so well at school. She talked about the
Right.
school. She didn't talk about the relationship, and that she was quite stressed about things going on with school and she was thinking about leaving. And I
Hmm.
believe it was Josh, her dad, said to her, before you make these decisions, I think you should go and see a third party and talk
Hmm.
these things through. Very sensible, actually,
Yep.
to do that. So that the third party, the you, for example, Dr. Z, you don't have any skin in the game. You are totally independent and objective, and you're
Correct.
there to listen and to hear and to at times guide or advise, but to be a soundboard. And that's what she did. And we've now
Hmm.
learned what happened in those 3 sessions, because it was only 3 sessions that she attended.
Correct.
So there's one
Yeah.
image of her, isn't there, of, friendly, good circle of friends, going to get married. She'd even got her dress. Everything's going in the
Sure.
right direction. But actually, behind the scenes, that wasn't the case.
No, and any time somebody has any of these kind of major life transitions, right? Getting married is one of them, obviously moving is another. There's always stress, there's always anxiety, and that's just a normal part of life. But I think what we were seeing was deeper than just your traditional everyday anxiety making life changes. It seems that, her actions seem kind of disproportionate to the context. So, for example, you know, she was settled. She was settled. She had a job. She had a job that she loved. She was engaged. Her home was here. And to up and leave all that says a lot, right? To up and leave that stability says a lot, especially when you're already anxious to deliberately move in a direction that's going to uproot you in every way that will naturally make you more anxious. It seems that, back to what you said about a purpose, that moving home was a little bit more than just I dislike my job. And it really kind of struck me that it would go that route of just uprooting everything. That it's more than just I'm anxious.
Yes. And what we've heard from the psychiatrist now is that there were these 3 sessions that she had some anxiety, but nothing major, no
Right.
suicidal ideation, but she did have some anxiety. She was on a low dose medication.
Right.
And what's clear and what we know now is that she was in the process of leaving her fiancé. And that
Yes.
separation point for me, as soon as I understood that her bags
Yep.
were packed, the ring had been taken off, and she was
Yep.
going to leave, that she had made her mind up. And it wasn't just leaving the job, it was leaving the relationship.
Yeah.
And for me, the red flag of she wasn't talking to people about the relationship.
Correct. That for me, as soon as I heard that it was following her wanting to leave the relationship and end the relationship and uproot herself, combined with the fact that she didn't talk about it. That's the thing, and that's the thing with that abuse, that coercive control that's under the surface that you don't see. It's not always physical violence. There's not always bruises. It's abuse that, number one, you can't see, but also is very difficult for the person who's being abused to communicate what's going on, because it's so hard to pinpoint what it is, because it's so subtle, it's so manipulative, it's so crazy making that when you say it out loud, it doesn't make sense to the average person. And so you have not her not talking about it, going to a psychiatrist, and we know that as you said earlier, the highest risk for violence is when the person's going to leave the relationship. It just it tracked for me, and that really for me was the red flag, was when I heard that was when she was going to leave.
Yes, and that part for me suddenly, and when I started posting about it, as now I know about separation, that is a very critical key
Yep.
piece of information to understand. And when we think back to the fact that she died suddenly and
Yes.
unexpectedly at 27, one of the
Yes.
things I always say to law enforcement and others is if a woman dies suddenly and unexpectedly, you
Mhm.
must treat it as a homicide right from the start. And
And
particularly
also
someone who's
the
27, right, who's young and her whole life
and
ahead of
healthy.
her. Why would you not treat it as suspicious right from the start? Which you must. I mean, anyone who's listening from law
Yeah.
enforcement, it's a you must, because you never get the scene back. And therefore, I've always said it when I was in the Met, you scale it up and then you can scale it down once you understand what's really going on. And I don't know who made the decisions here. The case file has never been made public.
Mhm.
So we know that obviously there was a blizzard, there was a snowstorm. Her mum and dad couldn't even get to her when they received a
Yes.
phone call telling her that something had happened to Ellen and she didn't need an ambulance or she wasn't being taken to the hospital. And they couldn't even get to her to understand what went on.
Yeah. I can't
And
fathom that.
oh, nor can I. I mean, my
I
goodness.
one of the other things too, just really quick, that I don't think I have ever in my professional experience and in cases that I've heard and cases I've consulted on for females in particular, it's very rare that females will commit suicide or kill themselves, and the means that they use is that gruesome. Females typically don't use those methods. And so I found that to be odd. And I also found as we had typically, with females, when they do, they don't like to leave essentially this big, physical and psychological mess for people. And so the whole thing was just very uncharacteristic of females who take their lives.
Yes. It's certainly when you see the 3D model
Yes,
reconstruction
I saw
of
that.
where the wounds are. So there's 20 wounds. And yes, this is really awful and horrible to have to discuss, but actually it is very important, certainly in my work, to understand crime scene assessment and what happened at the scene. Well, Ellen did have 20 stab wounds. 10 were to the back of her neck and her head. And that is incredibly unusual. And even when you see them, it might be physically impossible to administer some of those some of those wounds. And in fact, numerous experts have looked at the case. And it's worth just pointing out that Dr. Marlon Osborne was the original medical examiner, but the family, Sandy and Josh, wanted to get second opinions, and quite right too. They had to pay extra money to have a second opinion because they could not trust the process here, particularly when it was changed from a homicide to a suicide. So Dr. Cyril Wecht did write a report in 2012, and he commented that some of those stab wounds, the direction of the knife, he doesn't believe it would be possible for Ellen to self-inflict some of those injuries. But he also talked to the fact that stabbing suicides are rare, which I can attest to. And what's also very rare is to stab through clothes. When you do see it, you tend to have bare skin and not have someone fully clothed. So that's another anomaly. And also, one of the other things, that there were no hesitation wounds on other parts of her body, which you would expect with something like this. So it's not always what's present, it's what's absent. And so when you look at her with this 3D modeling, and that's due to work by a forensic pathologist called Dr. Wayne Ross, who actually wrote a report in 2017 and in 2021. His report is also very interesting, and it talks much more about the fact that there's staging at the scene. He believes there to be staging, which, having looked at some of the photos, I have to agree that it does look like the scene has been staged when you compare it back to the 911 call. And also, it is just so unusual to have a woman end her life like this when she's ending the relationship and she has plans to leave. And it's worth just pointing that out. The context is very important. She had planned to leave, start a new life back home where her parents lived, but not to exit the world. And her friends and family attest to that. Her mum and dad both spoke to her on that day. There were nothing that they picked up that concerned them, and the same with friends. There was nothing that indicated that she was suicidal. There was no note left either, for example.
There was nothing planned about this. There was nothing methodical about it. It was such a sudden, if you're going to look at it, like, it's such a sudden departure from the world. It doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. There's nothing predetermined. There's nothing, if it's a suicide, there's no plan. There's no, leaving anything for anybody else, or any type of note, like you said, and her behaviors. What I had read, she was making dinner reservations for the evening. She was in the middle of cooking stuff. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me, and it never has.
And I would agree with that. And yes, it does sound like she was preparing food. There was fruit in the sink, and there was a knife block that was turned over. And one of the injuries that was discovered was that she had a knife in her heart, and that came out on the 911 call. So to go back to the day in question and Samuel Goldberg's 911 call, but also the timeline, he states that he came home at 4:45 p.m. that day and that Ellen was at home. And then he stated that he went to the gym. And the 911 call was at 6:33 p.m. So it's a very narrow time window, actually, for something to happen, right? And it would make it, given that he did spend some time before he called 911, really his gym time would be about 30 minutes, which, there are people who go to the gym for 30 minutes, right? Who are very clear on what their schedule is. They're lifting weights, working certain muscle groups. They've only got 30 minutes. They're in and they're out. That can happen. Most people do tend to train for an hour. But what it sounds like is he went and trained for 30 minutes. Then he makes the 911 call at 6:33 p.m. But what we find out from when you listen to Sandy and Josh was that he called his uncle and his cousin beforehand, before the 911, which is incredibly unusual. If you do find someone that you love, who you don't know whether they're still breathing or not, even when you're panicked and in fear, your first port of call is normally to get help for them. And
That's
that
right.
help is from trained professionals, right?
That's right.
Not from your uncle or your cousin.
No, no, not. It would be automatic. I would think that your natural human reaction is to help this person, and you're going to do whatever means necessary to help that person. It is just almost automatic 911.
But that didn't happen here.
No.
And then when we understand the uncle, I mean, you probably know the local politics much better, but his uncle was a powerful attorney at the time who was connected to the senator who was, well, now is the governor, Governor Shapiro. And so that phone call goes in to the uncle and to the cousin, and they appear back in the timeline after the scene has been cleaned. And I'll explain a bit more about that. But albeit the first responders, when they attend, they tend to take his narrative that she had been stabbed and that she had stabbed herself. Well, the first thing to say about that is and if you discover your partner in blood,
Yes.
you don't know what's happened to them. And your first thought would normally be she's been attacked by someone.
Correct.
And yet there's
Especially
no
when it's
fear
a
or
stabbing.
concern.
No, especially stabbing. You would. I can't imagine somebody's natural reaction to that would be they stabbed themselves. Again, it doesn't fit. That's such an odd thing to say.
Yeah. And furthermore, on that point, I will go through the actual call itself in another episode, because I think there's a lot in terms of this 4-minute call where there are many markers of deception. And it really is concerning what was said within the call, even down to constant reference to lots of blood. And when you see the crime scene photos, there wasn't lots of blood. So why is he referencing lots of blood? But he actually says about the knife that when he's asked to do CPR, firstly, he's reluctant to do it, which is highly unusual. I don't think I've ever seen that before, where he says, I guess I have to, right? In response to the dispatcher saying, you need to do CPR. Then he's saying that he has to loosen her clothes, and he's struggling to loosen her clothes. And then he says, oh my God, she stabbed herself, which is such a strange conclusion to reach. And the dispatcher says, where? And Samuel Goldberg said, she fell on a knife. Oh no, her knife sticking out. And the dispatcher says, her what? And Samuel Goldberg says, there's a knife sticking out of her heart. And the dispatcher said, oh, she stabbed herself. Samuel Goldberg, I guess so, I don't know. Or she fell on it, I don't know. Okay, there are multiple issues just in that point of, oh no, her knife sticking out. Why would you give a personal pronoun to a knife, that it's her knife? To me, that immediately conjures up that she had a knife in her hand and was defending herself. And that's leakage. Then there's a knife sticking out of her heart. Why didn't he see it before? I mean, that would have been through her clothing. So it's very odd it's not referenced before when he's not specifying.
That stood out to me. Yeah, that stood out to me as well. Yeah.
And then the call handler's reiterating what he said, because he originally said, oh my God, she stabbed herself. Oh, she stabbed herself. He says, I guess so, I don't know. Or she fell on it, I don't know. Well, he's already said she's lying on her back. And if you fall on a knife, which is a very unusual thing to even think that somebody did, rather than someone came into our house and someone attacked her, that's your immediate thought. And are they still here? And oh my God, I'm in fear for my own life because whoever it is, but that doesn't even enter into this scenario.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So it's not what's present.
It was a very odd turn to take, right? That to fall on a knife, stab yourself versus being attacked.
Absolutely. And that's most people's normal conclusion. I mean, unless there's some indicators that someone's been talking about ending their life, your first conclusion, if you've been to the gym and you come back, is that somebody came into your property and did this, and then who are they? But he did state that she was lying on her back. So to fall on a knife, you would be lying the opposite way. So the narrative, there are so many points in here where the narrative doesn't make sense. And the first part, even the framing of the call, Samuel Goldberg says, help, I need, and then he's inaudible. I just walked into my apartment. My fiancé's on the floor with blood everywhere. Well, when you look at 911 calls, as I have, many, 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 you always know the purpose of a 911 call is for immediate help, urgency. And so most people will have in their mind what they're calling for in terms
Yep.
of, I need urgent help for my fiancé, she's on the floor.
Yes.
What I believe he's basically calling for is to say what he was doing, because he goes straight into I just walked in. So it doesn't seem to be that his urgent need is about getting paramedics there for her immediately, because she may still well be alive. And that indicates he most likely knows she doesn't need paramedics or to be rushed to the hospital because she's already dead. And
Yeah.
the blood referencing, I mean, she did have quite a deep knife wound to her head. And there was some blood, but it does look, when you look at the crime scene photos, like there has been a cleanup. And therefore, he may well be referencing blood that he may have seen beforehand. But the staging that Dr. Wayne Ross alludes to, it is regarding to a towel that is clean, that is in her left hand. It has no blood on it. So that seems very oddly placed. And her glasses being there and her sitting up, when the blood pattern and the spatter and the cast off, none of that points to that's the position that she was originally found in. So there are indicators of staging here. And why would you stage? I mean, in terms of crime scene analysis, the only reason someone stages a scene and takes that time, and bear in mind we do have missing time here, is because they're trying to point the attention elsewhere. They're trying to redirect. And they're trying to redirect away from themselves. That's the only reason why you would even consider staging a crime scene.
And also his pattern of thinking, his way of thinking, his way of responding requires a lot more cognitive effort than your natural response of I need help, I need help. And in order to be that present and be able to select your words like that, you have to be you have to have this emotional detachment from what's happening. And you would imagine that somebody who's engaged and about to get married would not be able to have that emotional detachment. It wouldn't look like that. It wouldn't be as detailed in their responses. They wouldn't be able to formulate that. That takes cognitive effort.
yeah, and the cognitive load that you talk about, there's not a flow of conversation. It's the 911, in my opinion, is staged again. We can stage things verbally and set things up. But the big red flag for me is the calling the uncle and the cousin beforehand.
Yeah.
And it's actually the cousin and the uncle who go round to the apartment. They call the manager of the apartment complex and ask, I believe it's the next day, whether they can enter the property because Samuel Goldberg needs some things.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is before there's been an autopsy. Dr. Marlon Osborne was doing the autopsy, and the first responders treat it as a suicide. It's then called a homicide by that time, and the building manager has called up the police and said, look, the uncle and cousin want to come round. And the police say, we've released the scene and it's okay to clean it, sanitize it. And that's what happens overnight. The apartment is cleaned and sanitized, so they lose the crime scene immediately. And that is just huge. That is a huge error, because then when it's determined to be a homicide, now you've got a situation where you don't have a crime scene. Plus, you've had people walking, not just cleaning in there, but walking in there. And what I found out recently, Dr. Z, was that when the cousin and uncle went round, what they took were Ellen's possessions. Did you hear that? That they took her laptop, they took
Her laptop,
her phone, the engagement ring.
Yep. I had read that. Yes.
Seems like
They took
very odd things to retrieve.
you would think that if they're going to retrieve things, it would be things that were of personal meaning or value to her family, or it wouldn't be her computer, right? Or it just doesn't, again, it doesn't add up. Why take anything of hers? In what capacity were you there? Were you there on behalf of her family? Did they ask you to take stuff of hers? You know what I'm saying? So under what direction were you there to take her things? Who unless the parent specifically told you, go take her things, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, I mean, that's very curious to me to take those specific items rather than emergency things for Samuel Goldberg, clothing, for example, things
Correct.
that you would need. So
Did they take anything of his when they were there, or they just took her things?
I'm not sure. I believe
Okay.
that they probably did take some of his things to justify the entry because that's
The
what they
entry.
said that they were there for.
Right.
And I would believe that he did need some things. I mean, ultimately, when your property is then sealed off, but of course, we know
Yeah.
it wasn't sealed off for very long. And
Right.
very quickly, it was released, sanitized, clean. And in fact, on January the 28th was the funeral. And I have heard Josh and Sandy, the parents, talk about the fact that the funeral date was also Samuel's birthday. And it was at the funeral on January the 28th where Josh announced that the manner of death had been determined as homicide, which shocked everybody, that it was actually a homicide. And they also told Samuel Goldberg that he was the prime suspect. So that was it within a couple of days. So there was this big change suddenly to it being a homicide, but apparently the Philadelphia Police Department played down the homicide aspect. And it was in I think it was April 4th, that Dr. Osborne, from the secret meeting, decided to change the manner of death to suicide.
Hmm.
And that is
Hmm.
very confounding to me.
Hmm.
But when I've heard Josh and Sandy talk about that meeting, they say it was a secret meeting. They weren't there, so it's very hard to know what really went on. But apparently, Dr. Osborne was told that there was new information and that a security guard called Phil had been with Sam when he broke into the apartment and found Ellen. And that seemed to be some post-autopsy information that was so significant to him, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek,
Hmm.
that he changed his determination, which is absolutely unfathomable to me based on, maybe it was other pieces of information as well. But when you've examined the body and you have unique access and you have experience of autopsies and you find 11, he noted 11 other bruises on her body at various
Yes.
stages of healing, which
Correct.
again is very significant because they weren't attributed to what happened when she died. They were at
And
various stages.
strangulation marks as well. There were strangulation marks on her neck. There were bruises that were, as you said, in various stages of healing. And again, given the context of everything, seems very suspicious.
Yes, well, there's something that I've heard that originally, when I first started to look at the case, was that it was stated that there were no defensive wounds on
Yeah.
Ellen's hands and wrists. And now I have seen photos of Ellen's hands and wrists, and I can see very clear defensive marks, even possible binding of the wrists. And you mentioned strangulation. Well, that the first time I've seen that actually was in Dr. Wayne Ross's report about strangulation, and you can see clear marks of bruising around
Hmm.
her neck. Now, strangulation, of course, we know it increases the risk sevenfold to serious harm and
Correct.
femicide specifically. But why that wasn't given greater weight, I really don't know. And Dr. Wayne Ross, having looked at his report, the more recent one of 2021, and having seen his 3D modeling and looked at he's got 60 critical points. I don't know if you've read his report, Dr.
Hmm.
Z. Have you seen his 2021 report where he
I
lists
saw
60
the
critical.
model and the description of the depth and the location and the details of each puncture wound, if you want to call it that, each stab wound.
Yeah, and some of those stab wounds are superficial, but his report is very significant to me, given that he believes that actually it was the strangulation that killed her.
Hmm.
And she died by strangulation, and the stab wounds are the staging. Now, that's very interesting.
That would make a lot more sense to me if you are looking at this from a domestic violence, kind of a coercive control, abusive situation, because that unfortunately is the natural progression of how this usually develops. That would
Yes, and
make a
in
lot more sense.
And it does on multiple points. I mean, one, it is the number one method of how men kill women. And often we
Correct.
see hands going round the neck beforehand. And
Yes.
once that happens, they never de-escalate. The second part, why it makes sense, is the defensive wounds, that she's fighting him off. And the third part, her knife, well, we know the knife block was turned over. So it would make sense that if she's in the kitchen and she's preparing fruit, there could well be two knives involved here. And one of the knives she picks up and she's trying to defend herself. And those defense wounds are very clear on the photos, hands and wrists. And the other point, which was very significant to me, was that Dr. Wayne Ross opines that there's a 1.1 centimeter cut through her dura and spinal column. And he and Dr. Emery, there's another doctor involved, believed and opined that that happened post-mortem because of the lack of blood after the wound, which would indicate that it was post-mortem. And therefore, how could she inflict that upon herself? And the second part to that is when you join it up with the knife being embedded in her chest, which one came first? Because both would have killed her.
What's
So-
interesting too is if strangulation was the means of how she died, and the stabbing, let's say hypothetically, was the staging. What I also find interesting is that that type of stabbing has so much anger behind it that I think that's really important to take into account too. That to me indicates an intense amount of rage. Not, I don't even want to say anger, not anger, rage. And we see that a lot again in these domestic violence situations where there's these bouts of rage. And that is when a lot of these violent attacks occur. You know, people report their eyes changing, their face changing, almost looking like a different person in the moment. And that is when those types of violent acts occur. And so that would fit again with the nature of this stabbing. It was so violent. It was so excessive.
Well, I would add another point in there that I believe that it's quite controlled. And why I say that is
Yes.
because the scene is, in my opinion, I see staging signs and that
Yes.
this is a methodical thinking through what happens next. The original
Yes.
attack, I do believe, was a surprise. And it looks like when you see the crime scene that she was preparing fruit and
Yeah.
she had texted a friend an hour or so before, and then nothing else had been heard from Ellen.
Yeah. But I think that's important, the controlled rage, because I think there's this misconception with people who fit this personality construct that they don't have control over their rage, and they very much do because it's used as a manipulation tactic. So I should add in, yes, controlled rage, the rage used as an intimidation tactic. I agree with you completely on that. Yeah.
And trying to effectively, what I believe is stage the scene
Yeah.
itself. And
Yep.
when you think about the strangulation aspect, because I think this is just so important of why Dr. Osborne didn't see that as significant as strangulation. And in fact, Gavin Fish, who's been following this case right from the start, he's a local reporter. I heard him talk as well. And he said that he counted 59 bruises on her body. So he has seen pictures of Ellen, 59 bruises versus 11. Now, I can't talk to the discrepancy there, but
Yeah.
it just seems like key and critical injuries and wounds and were overlooked by Dr. Osborne. And that is confounding to me. And I don't know whether things like fingernail scrapings and, you know, whether the knives were processed. I don't know about that. No one's ever seen the case file and it's never been talked to. But this clearly, even from the state of her body, should have been treated as a homicide right from the start. And I have no understanding of why first responders would even place any
No.
weight on what Samuel Goldberg said. Like when you go to a scene, and I'm sat here with the book Policing Domestic Violence, which I wrote with two police officers, And it was published in 2009. Bearing in mind Ellen's case was 2011. We make it very clear what's expected from first responders. And you absolutely do not go into an address and accept the narrative of the person who is stood there, particularly when it comes to domestic violence cases.
Right.
I mean, this just beggars
We
belief.
see that so often. We
Why?
just talked about that. Yeah, I mean, that happens all too often.
Well, it has to stop. And that's why I say, who made the decision to release the scene right at the start? Who's the supervisor? That's what I'm interested in from the policing perspective. Who's the supervisor who made that decision, and on what basis? Because the autopsy hadn't even been undertaken at that point. That's what's even rarer about it. They didn't even wait for the autopsy, and yet they decided to release the scene. And that's the pain point for me in policing perspective. That's the pain point. They made the decision to release the scene. They followed his narrative. So even if there is some independence there, now we could be exposed here. So you get a double whammy. You've got a connection with the uncle to Governor Shapiro, politically, in terms of power, immense power, but you also have now decisions being made about the crime scene being released prior to the autopsy, when a woman has died violently and suddenly and unexpectedly. And that is so confounding and angry making to me. And I can't even fathom for Josh and Sandy how that would feel.
Just helpless, just absolutely helpless. I cannot, I mean, I've said that over the years. I cannot, and especially as a parent, forget being a psychologist, but as a parent, I cannot fathom that feeling of just absolute just grief and helplessness of trying to figure out and get justice for your daughter.
And have the bare basics done, common decency of an investigation. Ellen was a person, and she was a person living in Philadelphia, and why wasn't she treated with dignity and respect in death? And why weren't her family treated with dignity and respect? When I heard them talk recently, and they said that they were treated really poorly by law enforcement, I mean, this is just unfathomable to me. And I can only apologize to them, because this is not the standard that we would expect whatsoever. And they have had to fight and fight and fight to get any form of accountability. And most recently, why we mentioned that the case is in the headlines is because Sandy and Josh did get permission to sue the city of Philadelphia. And more specifically, when the judge allowed the case to move forward, the three defendants were Dr. Sam Galino, who was Dr. Marlon Osborne's medical examiner boss, Dr. Marlon Osborne, who was the assistant medical examiner who did the autopsy, and one of the police detectives, Detective John McNanny. And what was interesting is that on Monday, the 3rd of February, this case was going to trial, and the jury were being selected. And what I saw was on the Saturday, so right before the trial and the jury selection, on the Saturday, Dr. Osborne settled his suit. And that was really intriguing to see that he had decided to settle. And he said that he would determine that this case was something other than suicide. So, and I thought that language was very interesting, because he didn't say categorically homicide, but what he also said was that he had moved to Florida, so it's not within his gift to change the death certificate. But there had been an agreed settlement between him and Josh and Sandy, Ellen's mother and father. And then on the Monday, the jury had been selected, and then we got news that the other two defendants had settled. So we're talking about a financial settlement, but there is an expectation that the case, now they have made that determination that it wasn't suicide, that the case will be reinvestigated and looked at, you would hope, independently, right?
Yes. I mean, yes, you would hope so. I just, again, I just hope this family, I hope they do right by this family, because they have been through so much and they deserve justice for her. It still just blows my mind that the process of this was played out the way that it did. It leaves me speechless. Really. I mean, it's so shocking to me that, even like you said, I mean, I even go back to the very beginning. It's so shocking to me and honestly appalling to me that from the very beginning they accepted his narrative. I know this happens. I see it. We see it. You see it all the time. But but how do you accept that narrative with this in front of you? Blows my mind. And the fact that we're still here now blows my mind.
I agree. And it's really important that people are vocal about this case and understand what's gone on and support the family to get justice for Ellen, because this isn't actually just about Ellen. I believe this case is about women and how women are just written off and a male's narrative is just accepted, and how power behind the scenes operates to the detriment of justice and women and safety ultimately. So it's really important. And now I've just found exactly what Dr. Osborne did say. And I just want to read out what he said. So this was on Saturday, the 1st of February. Dr. Osborne settled. He signed a document that amended his long-held position on Ellen's death. And he stated, "It is my professional opinion Ellen's manner of death should be designated as something other than suicide." He cited additional information that he had gotten since he issued the amended death certificate. And he said, "I'm now aware that information exists which draws into question, for example, whether Ellen's fiancé was witnessed entering the apartment before placing the 911 call on January the 26th, 2011, whether the door was forced open, whether Ellen's body was moved by someone else inside the apartment after or near the time of her death, and the findings of Dr. Lindsay Emery, MD, from her neuropathological evaluation of Ellen's cervical segment sample." So he states that he is now aware that Ellen's fiancé was not with the security guard, Phil, when he entered the apartment. Now, what I have understood is that Phil made a statement to the police and he said that he was not with Samuel Goldberg when he entered the apartment. And in fact, there's security footage showing Samuel Goldberg leaving his office and going up in the elevator to go into the apartment. And this issue about the door being forced, well, it doesn't look like it was forced at all, or broken, I should say. It does look like it was forced, but from the inside and not broken. And that's what Dr. Wayne Ross talks about. And the findings of Dr. Lindsay Emery, well, that's similar to what I described in Dr. Wayne Ross's report, where he talks about that 1.1 centimeter that cut that he and Dr. Emery believes happened post-mortem. So that's very significant that the original medical examiner decided to that the original medical examiner decided to settle before the Monday. And then the other two, of course, they had no real option, did they? They weren't the ones who did the hands-on autopsy. So I was surprised it even went that far, but that's a big deal. And now the family, there's a second lawsuit because the family, it doesn't end there. They're now demanding that the medical examiner's office changes its ruling on Ellen's cause of death. And that's pending before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And Dr. Osborne said that he cannot change the death certificate himself because he's no longer employed by Philadelphia ME's office. So these really are bombshells. You think 14 years, family had to sue to get the decent common sense decision to be determined for Ellen.
That's why I say it's so it really is. It's so just, again, mind-blowing to me. And even, one thing I want to touch on that we didn't touch on that I think is also important from the psychological standpoint is the text messages that he sent to her prior to not, when he wasn't able to get in. And the way he spoke to her, whether that was before, after, it actually doesn't even matter because the language that he used to think that was not just appropriate, but that was his norm. That was his baseline. He had no recognition of how that sounded, which says to me that's his norm. And so if that's your baseline, openly and publicly, can you imagine behind closed doors? And I know it's such a small thing, but that really spoke volumes to me.
And do you have those text messages, Dr. Z? Can you read out?
Let me pull them up.
just whilst you're pulling them out, because this is very important, the digital data, the look behind the curtain, as I call it,
Mm-hmm.
we know that her phone, she texted a friend at 3:47 p.m. and that was the last time, and it was about being home early because of the snowstorm, and then her phone is dead. And her phone was found in the bathroom, which again is quite
Mm-hmm.
unusual. Most people have their phone with them or next to them when, particularly if they're preparing food and your fiance is at the gym and there's a blizzard.
Oh, I
So
love them.
that's what you would expect. But then at 5:32 p.m. to 5:54 p.m., there Samuel Goldberg sends several, I think there's 9,
Mm-hmm.
aren't there, short
Mm-hmm.
one-liners. Do you
Yep.
want to read them
Yeah.
out?
It says he texted her and it was in this order. Hello, open the door. What are you doing? I'm getting pissed. Hello. And this is the one that bothered me. You better have an excuse. Ah, again, if that's your baseline of how you speak to your fiance, just because the door wasn't opening, that's it.
Well,
It's
so
so
he says,
disproportionate. So he says. So he says, what the F? And then you have no idea. I mean, that's that is not everyday language. That is very, to me, controlling, very it shows dominance. It just uh threatening, intimidating. It's not the everyday text, even when you're arguing with somebody.
yeah, but it's not a healthy relationship to talk to your partner like that, even if you
No.
are outside the door and
Yeah,
you
but
can't get in.
it's even I'd almost rather him have cursed at her. There's something about the language of the power and control and the just the dominance that he tries to assert in those text messages. More than just unhealthy. It sounds extremely controlling. And
Yes.
yes, unhealthy, obviously.
Yes, I mean, I always go for unhealthy first of all when you see just text messages like that, because they are one-liners. So
Yeah.
it is that moment where if that's how you talk to your partner, then that shows a lot about what's really going
Yes.
on in the relationship.
Yes.
Because that part, there's no editing to it. They were, what are you doing? I'm getting pissed. And in quick succession, we're talking about 5:32 to 5:54
Mm-hmm.
p.m., 9 times. And if someone talks to you like that, you would feel anxious. You would feel
Yes.
concerned, right?
Of
I would
course.
if someone was talking to me like that. And we know that she was seeing a
Absolutely.
psychiatrist for anxiety. And that part, again, is important to state that the psychiatrist did say there were no signs of any suicidal ideation. She was not.
Good.
It was a female psychiatrist. She was not concerned about Ellen. And I do feel that even seeing a psychiatrist and being on a low dose of medication, that law enforcement may well have immediately just made 2 and 2 equal 5
Mm-hmm.
of that means suicide.
Yeah.
Even if you get a small, warning within medication, there could be suicidal risk. You can't just take it without understanding the full context of the
No.
relationship of what's going on. And of course, the autopsy, which is super important. Her body is the silent witness. And if
Yes.
Gavin Fisher's right of these 59 bruises, that shows you that there was sustained abuse on Ellen. And that was most
Tells a
likely the
very
reason.
different, yeah, that tells a very different story, that is long, it's a long process, ongoing. If there was abuse, it went on for a long time. She never spoke about it. That's the part. It's just she never spoke about it. And when you have that type of abuse where you don't talk about it because you don't know what to say, or you're scared, you're fearful for your life, because I have no doubt that given what occurred, I have no doubt that she was fearful to leave. It's not a quote normal breakup in these situations. These are the I always say this. These are the only types of breakups that require an actual exit strategy. Right? I mean, you have to develop an actual plan. I work with people on plans on how to get out of their relationships. That's not a normal breakup. And I just think that I would imagine that she was scared for a very long time, scared enough that she was willing to give up where she had put her roots down with her, with her soon to be husband in Philadelphia, with the job that she loved, with the friends that she had, to uproot and move back home with her parents at 27.
Yeah, that takes a lot. And even going to
Yeah.
see a psychiatrist, I mean, the
Yes.
first step, and this is why, isn't it, Dr. Z, it's so important that mental health professionals are trained to understand coercive control, that when people come and see you,
Yes.
they may not be safe. And actually, you need to be asking about what's going on within the relationship. And what we now know from friends, and I've heard numerous people, including Gavin Fish and Josh and Sandy, talk to this, that they noticed a change in her behavior, in Ellen's
Yeah.
behavior, no longer being sort of gregarious and the leader, that she was checking in with him before she could make any
Yes.
decisions. So she wasn't making any decisions unilaterally. She had to defer back to him. And things like she used to wear like the spaghetti strap tops. And then she started wearing, I think 3 or 4 months before she died, turtlenecks. So necks that, high neck tops, long sleeves. And often when women start to do that, and that's not normally their clothing of choice, it's because they're hiding bruising and marks. And I can't say that 100% that's what was happening, but I am curious about Gavin Fish's 59 bruises, marks on her body, and even Dr. Osborne's autopsy stating 11 bruises that were in various stages of healing, i.e., they are not from the attack itself. They're in various stages of healing, which points to either being exceptionally clumsy or abuse. And as we know, women do tend to come up with lots of reasons for why there might be bruises or marks on their bodies to hide what's really going on. It can feel very shameful, particularly if you are gregarious and you're a strong person and people see you as this, very strong woman. There can be even more shame of
That's a very
admitting.
good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, because this this can happen to anyone. People think, "Well, I'm smart enough. That wouldn't happen to me," or I'm strong. I would tell them to get lost. It doesn't work like that. This type of abuse is very subtle, and it's like the leaky faucet. You don't really notice it until you're standing in a room flooded with water. But the other thing too, to your point earlier about this being very controlled and staged, it's not coincidence that the bruises that a lot of these women have who experience this type of abuse are in places that are not visible. There's a reason for that. That's not coincidence. That's done on purpose.
Yeah. So there clearly was a lot more going on behind the scenes. And of course, Sam Goldberg has denied any form of culpability in this, and he is now married. He has a child. He originally did call Sandy up and would speak to her fairly regularly, the mum, and then stopped when he got engaged. But I do really think this case needs independent investigators. In fact, the family had instructed investigators and Dr. Wayne Ross and others that have been incredibly helpful to them. And I've offered up my assistance too more recently, because I do feel that you also need coercive control and domestic violence experts to weigh in,
Absolutely.
because it's not just the event of someone dying. You have to look at the context of everything that went before. And often men, dare I say it, do not see the subtleties, the nuanced behavior, the coercive control that's invisible to many, many people. And it's very hard for them to put themselves in a woman's shoes, but to understand this spider's web. And even the statistics, most still don't know 76% of murders of women happen at the point of separating from abusive men.
Yes.
And that is a statistic for women, not a general statistic,
Correct.
and it relates to coercive control. And the coercive control, the checking in with that person, not being able to make your own decisions, not having your own agency, your own autonomy. And when you see personality change and it goes from one thing to another, these are subtle things. When someone's not eating as much, they're not sleeping as well, there's behavioral change going on. They sound flat, whereas before they used to be the life and soul.
Yeah.
These
And
kinds of
even little
things.
things like preferences. Right. They used to love going out to dinner. They don't do that anymore. Or they used to, love playing tennis. They don't do that anymore. And it's different than you can see a lot of that with major depression, right? People start to withdraw and things like that. This is different. This is a different type of behavior. The function's very different. The behavior that you see in coercive control, the function of the behavior is survival, right? Whereas with depression, when you're withdrawing, the function's very different. It's the lack of energy, no motivation. So it's very different. On the surface, it could look very similar, but to your point, it's very important to understand the coercive control and that form of abuse and look at the context and on a larger scale.
Absolutely. The 1,000 cuts that go before. It's so important that we understand that. So I hope that people do take an interest in Ellen's case, because it seems like there isn't a huge amount of national media and scrutiny, and that's what it needs. People can tweet and write to Governor Shapiro about Ellen's case and getting justice for her. The case does need to be reopened, in my opinion, and having third-party independents reviewing and investigating the case. Because if it is to be determined that it's a homicide, which if it's not suicide, is it undetermined or is it homicide? And there are very clear markers in the crime scene assessment and from the autopsies and from Dr. Cyril Weck's report, Dr. Henry Lee, Dr. Wayne Ross, they all opine homicide. And that's where I'm at, looking at the whole context of the case. And if it's homicide, the next question is, who is the killer? Mm-hmm. And that does need to be looked at. And the family deserve justice. Ellen deserves to be treated like a full human being and have dignity and respect in her death. And like I said, I can't fathom the fact that Josh and Sandy have spent these 14 years at their retirement.
I know.
Trying to get justice for their daughter. They're exhausted, their attorney said. And I can absolutely understand that.
We said this earlier, I cannot fathom the level of emotional and physical, just pure exhaustion. I mean, and it's so unbelievably tragic. They probably have such a helpless feeling that they can't get through, they can't get what they need, and they just want justice for their daughter.
Absolutely. So to my listeners, please go on the Justice for Ellen Facebook page. Do let them know that you are in support of them. A family should never have to fight this hard for the most basic things to be done. And look, I'll say from a law enforcement perspective, most law-abiding citizens do think that when something horrific like this happens, that the right things would then occur, i.e. that you have to have investigators who are the advocate for your dead daughter, that they are going to ask questions, that they are working for the victim. And that clearly has not happened here. And my heart just goes out to Josh and Sandy. So please do show them support and love. Please do let Governor Shapiro know that you believe that the case should be reopened. And I know that there are people who listen all around the world. It doesn't matter where you live. This is about justice for Ellen, but it's also about all women. And we have to use our voices when one of us no longer has our voice to say what happened. So I want to thank you, Dr. Z, for your time and for jumping on.
Thank you for having me.
I know
thank you, as always, for everything you do, really.
I appreciate you saying that. I want to get to a place where the Ellens are going to the counselors, the therapists, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, and they're getting good information about how to leave safely and about coercive control. And we hold abusers to account, that when they do things that are terrible, that we hold them responsible and we hold them accountable. And we are very loud about that. And it makes abusers think twice. Mm-hmm. It can act as a deterrent when there is a serious consequence, when things happen. We want to nip it in the bud before it escalates. So I'm ending thinking about Ellen and her incredible family who've been fighting for her. And all the links are in the show notes. And thank you so much, Dr. Z. And to all my listeners, please be active on this and always be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.